I remember as a kid, him saying, one day you're going to put money into your retirement plans. And I'm just like, I don't even know what that means. 10 years old. And where I realized along the way with my uncle was that he was always talking to me about saving money. But I always asked myself, for what? Retirement, as a kid, as a 20-year-old, like that just doesn't resonate with me. Like I'm just trying to live right now, And so when I think about, why it's so important for someone to have a advisor, a mentor, someone who's going alongside with you on this, who actually knows who you are and what you're trying to do, it really does hugely impact the type of financial plan that you make.
Are you ready to rewrite your financial future? Today's guest, Bernadette Joy, went from $300,000 in debt to millionaire in her 30s, proving that financial freedom isn't just possible, it's inevitable with the right mindset. As the dynamic CEO of Crush Your Money Goals, a Forbes featured expert, and now a best-selling author, she's helped thousands ditch debt, build wealth, and take control of their money without sacrificing joy. If you're tired of feeling stuck and ready for real, actionable strategies, this episode is your game changer. Get ready to be inspired, fired up, and financially fearless. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Mitlin Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Mitlin Financial, and let's dive into the show. I'm here with Bernadette Joy, CEO of Crush Your Money Goals. Pleasure to be here, Bernadette, with you today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so listen, I want to jump right in. Our listeners are really fascinated with the entrepreneurial journey. There are so many similarities at times and so many differences as well. Wanted to get your background. We'll talk about Crush Your Money Goals, but before we get into that, how did you get here? What led you to this point? What was your entrepreneurial journey?
Yes. So I think it's pertinent to say I am first generation Filipino American. I'm the 8th of my father's 9 kids. And my father, my mom, and my brother are all accountants. And I was the rebel who said, I don't want to be an accountant. And by rebel, I meant I still went to college, got 2 degrees, went into a Fortune 100 company, and was in HR. And a decade later, I decided to take a really big leap, which was to actually pursue passions of mine that were really involved in helping other small businesses, helping underserved communities. And I went back to school to get my MBA to figure out what that would look like. So I was studying entrepreneurship and sustainability in my MBA program at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And somewhere along the line in that program, I said, what would happen if I actually went to become an entrepreneur myself? Because I was studying on how I could support entrepreneurs, but I said, in order for me to support entrepreneurs, I should probably learn what that is on my own. And at the time, I was in my late 20s, and I was in this phase of life where all of my best friends were getting married, and I was the bridesmaid in like a dozen different weddings. And so I had this problem where totally vanity problem where it's just like, I keep having to go to all of these events, the bridal showers, the bachelorette parties and the weddings and stuff, but I don't have a lot of money because I have all of a student loan debt from going to my master's program, but I still want to look cute in front of my friends and I still want to go to these events. So I started a business. My first business before Crush Your Money Goals was a business called Dressed, and it was a local, like a Rent the Runway, if you've heard of Rent the Runway in New York. And the business that I started was different from Rent the Runway, that people could physically come to this location and get a personal stylist to help them get styled for their next event. And long story short, I ran that business for 3 years, and I realized that the part of it that I loved the most was not actually the retail part of it, because working a retail business, 7 days a week, after hours, with people who have fashion emergencies was not my favorite part of it. My favorite part of that business was teaching women how to save money. And along the way, I had a lot of people who were very fascinated by the fact that I left my corporate day job in order to run this business, which was very different. Like working at Goldman Sachs was very different from working in my own retail shop as a stylist. And that's when I started teaching other people about my entrepreneurship journey. And then Crush Your Money Goals was born.
Wow. So was that the impetus for you getting and becoming so passionate about personal finance, or was there more to it that really, invigorated that in you?
I would say there were several factors that really got me into personal finance. One was the fact that I did exactly what my parents said to do. I grew up in New York City and in Queens, and my father worked his way up all the way from a low-level accountant to the CFO of a company in New York City, which was, to me, I think about it, it's such an amazing feat as a Filipino immigrant to be able to do that. And at the end of his career, he didn't have a lot of money. And that was such a weird juxtaposition to say, wow, so you can be really good with money in a business and still not be good with money personally. And I felt that as, the eighth of nine kids, the common rhetoric we got all the time is like, we can't afford that. We can't do that. Like, that's too expensive, right? So that was
Right.
one of the impetuses, was that I remember that my father and my mom, personal story was that at some point they could no longer afford their mortgage in New York City, and they were forced to move to Las Vegas, where the cost of living was much lower. And I remember them calling me and asking me if I could cover their mortgage, when me myself was like just starting out of college and I had no money
Sure.
on my own. And so I remember thinking, wow, my dad worked really hard all of these years, and that rhetoric of working hard for like decades and decades doesn't necessarily guarantee that you will be safe in retirement. So that was a big piece of it. But then the other piece of personal finance for me was going back to the story of my first business with dress, was that there was all these women who would come into my studio and want to look rich.
Right.
Right? They're like, I need to go to this gala, or I need to go to this wedding, or I need to go to this thing. And I really, really care what people think about me, but I don't want to spend a lot of money. And so I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, what would be even better than helping women look rich is to actually help them get rich. And that's what really made me think about doing Crush Your Money Goals.
That is quite the impetus right there, in terms of the personal story from the family and the background giving you the drive, and then the experience that you had from the entrepreneurship journey, really kind of melding those two things together to help people. And I find it interesting, because I think a lot of people, and where you're different in many ways than others that talk about personal finance. One of those being that you talk about the importance of finding a mentor or a financial advisor who understands who you are as a whole person, which I think is so vitally important, right? A lot of times I think their advisors or mentors, they are only concerned about the dollars and cents, and
Yes.
not necessarily what they mean to the whole person. Can you share why you think and feel that is so important for folks?
From my personal experience, once I started, well, I'll take a step back. Even before I started really getting to the personal finance phase, I was just always told, like, you should save money, put your money into 401k. I have how there's like Rich Dad Poor Dad is, the famous book. I had like Rich Uncle Poor Dad, where my uncle, who is my dad's next brother, they're the only two of the 9 siblings that immigrated to the US. He ended up being very wealthy. And so I remember as a kid him saying, one day you're going to put money into your retirement plans. And I'm just like, I don't even know what that means. 10 years old. And where I realized along the way with my uncle was that he was always talking to me about, and my cousins and other people my age was always talking to us about saving money. But I always asked myself, for what?
Interesting.
Retirement, as a kid, as a 20-year-old, like that just doesn't resonate with me. Like I'm just trying to live right now, And so when I think about, why it's so important for someone to have a advisor, a mentor, someone who's going alongside with you on this, who actually knows who you are and what you're trying to do, it really does hugely impact the type of financial plan that you make. So as a prime example, it was very difficult for me to tell my family. Again, think about this. My father was the oldest of 9 kids. My mom was the youngest of 8 kids. I'm the 8th of 9 kids. So what was the number one question I always got? When are you having kids?
Well, you were the lucky number 8, right? Though?
Right? And so it was always, when are you having kids? And it took me a long time to finally say very confidently to my family, actually, I'm not having kids and I'm not planning to ever have kids. And a financial plan for a couple who's child free is very different from a financial plan of a couple who plans to have children. Neither of them are better than the other. They're just different. And so when I started accumulating more wealth, the first time I went to go find a financial advisor myself, I ran into a couple of issues with them because one, I said to them, I said, I want to be a millionaire, but before I turn 40. And I'm not planning on having kids. And I want to grow this business, and I want a large portion of my investments to be invested back into the one business that I can control, which is not on the stock market. It's my own business. And the feedback I got from my advisor at the time, where they're like, wow, we just never had someone like you. And I was like, well, that's not good then. Right? And so finding someone who said, oh yeah, I have worked with entrepreneurs before. I have worked with someone who is child-free before. I have worked with someone who has, come from a family who's a little bit crazy before. Having someone on your side that maybe they didn't live it themselves, but they can at least empathize and understand what those things look like and how those impact your financial decisions is critical. And I would say, even higher priority sometimes than some of the other kind of like knowledge-based things that they try to sell us, which is like, if you can really sit down and understand who I am as a person, then likely you're going to be able to build a better plan for me.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, our first meeting with the families we potentially are working with, we call it an "Is there a fit" meeting, where we don't even have them bring statements. We really want to have this conversation about who they are, what their goals are, what their objectives. And really the point of that first meeting is to discern whether or not their issues, challenges, concerns are things that we've encountered and can help them work through. Because if they are, then that's probably a good fit. We can help them. If it's something that we're not familiar with, then they're probably better served with somebody else. And I think those knowledge-based things or items, to your point, are things that we all have to be somewhat, table stakes, right? You have to know that stuff. And we talk, no pun intended with your last name, but we talk about joy a lot on the show. And we talk about what brings the family joy and how to impart that in the family and what that looks like. So thank you for sharing that personal story. Now, you mentioned earlier a fair amount of your debt, right? That you talk about eliminating, like $300,000 worth of debt in a short period of time. A fair amount of that was attributable to your MBA, that degree that you got. If you knew what you know now, would you still have done that MBA program? Because I think there are other people listening that are thinking about schooling and things like that. And, there's this big debate about college and taking on that kind of debt. What would you do?
I love that you asked this question because I'm getting asked that question a lot right now as well. And to be honest, my answer would be I probably would not have done it in the time that I did it. I think I still would have pursued an MBA, but probably when I was in a different stage of life where I could actually really appreciate the value of it. And so what I mean by that is, funny enough, so I'm on book tour right now, and I reached out to my alma mater to say, because they always, feature alumni and stuff. I said, hey, I wrote a book recently and I would love to be able to share it with my fellow alum. And they came back to me and said, well, if we interview you, basically, are you going to talk bad about the program? Because we have seen in your posts that you have been unhappy with the cost of the program. And I said, oh, that's so interesting. So y'all knew that I was saying that and no one addressed it with me directly, right? And, not that I'm saying, oh, I'm somebody important, but I do write for Forbes and for other places. So, if I have an opinion about it, there are some people who will take that opinion. And so I said, well, I would love to have that discussion because you can think that something is expensive, but still not regret it, right? If that makes sense. And so that's kind of how I feel about it with the MBA program, is that it was expensive. Would I have made a different choice? I probably would have extended out how long it took me to do the MBA. Like I did the MBA in their recommended time of 18 months, 2 years, but I could have done it in 5 years and had spread out that payments over a longer period of time. And I also at the time was really doing the MBA more of as an escape from corporate versus a leap into my next choice. I think the entrepreneurship thing kind of happened serendipitously, but unfortunately, I meet a lot of folks, including a lot of my MBA classmates, who did the MBA because they thought that it would immediately be a ticket to a higher income career, and that's really just not necessarily true. And so when people go into the MBAs, I always tell them like, well, when you go into it, like you have to have a really clear intention as to why you're going into it. Because if you are going to the MBA program and you still don't know how to network, and you still don't have a good resume, and you still are not a good interviewer, it doesn't really matter if you have an MBA or not.
Right. So basically what I'm hearing is just like you plan for your financial life, you should be planning for your educational life too, and have a game plan before you pull the trigger on either an undergrad or even an advanced degree.
Mm-hmm. And I would say the main reason that I don't regret doing the MBA was not actually the curriculum itself. The particular program that I was in, it was an online MBA program before online MBA programs were a thing. Like it was still very taboo back then, before the pandemic, of people being like, oh, you're doing an online MBA program? That must be less than a regular MBA program. Since then, they've combined all the programs. And now they're all one program. But the main reason I don't regret it is because I've met two of my best friends coming out of that MBA program. And I got to travel the world as part of the MBA program. So I got to go to South Africa to study entrepreneurship. I got to go to Buenos Aires. I got to go to Beijing and London. And the biggest takeaway I got from going to those different places, especially going to South Africa and Buenos Aires, it gave me the confidence to become an entrepreneur. Because we all think that the US is very difficult to live in or be a small business owner, but try being a small business owner in South Africa or Buenos Aires, where inflation is like 1,000%.
I'm a big fan. I love South Africa. It's one of my favorite locations. So I've had the ability to travel there, which was fantastic.
And it was very eye-opening to me to see that there were entrepreneurs who were trying it out in these much harsher like entrepreneurial conditions. And so it's like, if this person can build a business in Buenos Aires, like I should be able to at least give it a shot in the US.
Agreed. Now, one of the things you talk about a lot, obviously through personal finance, is having conversations about money. And you know, I feel like they're so vitally important. Why do you feel having those conversations are so important? You know, going back to, I think it was, you mentioned your dad saying, right, hey, one day you're going to put money in a retirement account, right? I think there was probably a greater conversation to be had there, perhaps. But I know you're a big proponent of, you know, having those conversations. Why are they so vitally important?
So there's a lot of conversation about legacy when it comes to planning for your kids. And I used to get a lot of rhetoric as someone who's child free to say, oh, well, you don't have kids, but I do. And so like, you don't understand how stressful it is for me to do financial planning. And little did people know that, you know, some of the backstory that I told you. Well, my parents, like I was my parents' retirement plan.
Right.
And so I even wrote an article about it in Forbes that said, you know, 3 steps you should do if you are your parents' retirement plan, which is the reality for a lot of Gen Xers and millennials who are seeing their like baby boomer parents not have enough money to retire. Like that's happening in real time right now. And so I think it's really important to have these conversations, not only early, but often before it's necessary. And that's the personal mistake that I made. That I waited too long to have these conversations. And unfortunately, you know, for me, my father passed away during the pandemic.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. But he passed away during the pandemic with 9 kids and no will.
Wow.
So I'm sure you can understand how stressful that can be as, you know, as a wealth advisor yourself to say, hey, like, There is so much discovery that had to happen after the fact. There is so many things that we just didn't know what that would look like. And that would have been a much less stressful time where we could have just focused on grieving, you know, if that stuff had been in place. And then my mom, this, past year, she got a kidney transplant. So she had like failing kidneys and it's hereditary. And so one of the things that I think about is like every female in my mom's side have had kidney issues. And I've already had experienced kidney issues like in my 20s and 30s. So part of the discussion is, you know, it feels uncomfortable now. It is 100 times worse having these conversations when it's like after the fact or feels like it's too late. So I want people to learn that from my mistake. I wish Bernadette now could say, hey, Bernadette 10 years ago, have these conversations with your parents now because it's going to save you so much heartache later on. And then from just a health perspective, when my mom had that kidney transplant, it really woke me up. Was again, right? You would think I would have been woken up after my father passed away, but just she couldn't have not made it through that surgery. And then what were the conversations then? And so I tell everyone now that there's a lot of conversations around the conversation with your kids, but there's not a lot of guidance for those of us who are adults who are trying to have conversations with our parents. And so I really encourage that, and it's part of the book.
Imagine a relationship where financial conversations don't feel stressful, but actually bring you joy. We've designed a guide to help you have positive, meaningful money conversations with your partner. This isn't just another budgeting tool, it's a roadmap for building trust and connection. So if you're ready to start a joyful money journey with your partner, go to mitlin.us/couplesjoy and download your free guide. Transform your financial future together starting today. Yeah, I think that's great. Great point, since those conversations are so important. And, we've seen challenges with families when a parent passes away and there's only one child. So I can only imagine when there are nine, it exacerbates it that much even more. And I'm very sorry for your loss, but on the other hand, glad to hear your mom's doing well following the kidney transplant. So, it sounds like, you and I have a similar life experience in terms of having dads that were kind of hesitant about this entrepreneurial path. I mean, I talk very heavily. I remember when I decided to go down the route I went, my dad was like, "What are you talking about? You got to be a teacher. You got to have a pension, things of that nature." And my mom was like on the opposite side of the spectrum. She was like, "Listen, take the shot now when you have no responsibilities, had no kids, not married, didn't have my house, none of that thing." So, but my dad was very hesitant about it. For you, what was the catalyst for you that really said, "Hey, I'm going to step out of this path that I was kind of destined to follow in their eyes"? What was that moment for you, or that catalyst?
Honestly, I don't know if it's coming. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, if I'm being totally honest with you, Larry, pretty much every other day I'm like, should I still be doing this? This is a lot. This is really hard.
Welcome to entrepreneurism.
Exactly, right? So, everyone talks about, oh, it's so hard to work in corporate, but now as an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur for coming up on 10 years now, I tell people, I'm like, you know what? If you've got a decent place to work and they give you a steady paycheck, that has value too. I'm not in favor of a lot of this social media rhetoric that's like, oh, entrepreneurship means that you can just work from anywhere and you just get complete control over your hours. For my experience, entrepreneurship has been 10 times harder than working for someone else, but it's been also 10 times more rewarding. And so I think the fortune that I've had was I have had a series of people that, without saying so or without being formal mentors of mine, I was watching unconsciously about how their lives were different from what I saw my parents have. And so I talked about the rich uncle, my dad's him and my dad would be as close to twins as possible in terms of they came here together and they grew up in the same family. But my uncle became independently wealthy by starting his own accounting practice. And so, I saw what that afforded him, not just in terms of material things, but that he could just go on vacation and take his wife and my cousin to all these trips and stuff. And then when I was in my MBA program, I was very fortunate that I had a old recruiting company that used to keep recruiting me into different financial services companies. They finally reached out to me one day. They're like, "We saw on social media that you're not working anywhere right now." I was like, "Yes, I'm doing my MBA right now." They're like, "Well, would you want to work for us even part-time? And you could just be a recruiter for us and to recruit other HR people," which is what I was doing before. And so the head of that company, I ended up writing one of my papers about him in my MBA program. Shout out to Ed, who lives in Long Island. He told me the story of he's been doing recruiting in various forms for almost 4 decades at this point. But he told me how during the financial crisis, when most of his clients were Barclays and JP Morgan and all these places, that he took it upon himself to pay for his entire payroll out of his own pocket until they could get the business back off the ground. And I said, wow, like that is someone I really admire, who's not just like trying to build a business, but he actually really cares about the well-being of his employees. And he would tell me that he said, we had this joke back then, because I told him one day, I'm like, you know what? I really want to be like Taylor Swift. And he said, what do you mean? She's so famous and she's so like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm not trying to be famous. I just like that she speaks up a lot and that she's very vocal about what her opinions are. And, and she's like breaking down some of these barriers within her industry. I'm not trying to become like literally like Taylor Swift, but I like that about her as a business person. And so, I've since left that company, and he and I have still stayed in touch, and he'll like message me every now and then. He's like, I saw you in Forbes. I saw you in CNBC. He's like, you are becoming like Taylor Swift. And so I'm saying that to you in the sense of the impetus for me was that if I didn't have some of these models in my life, I don't know that I would have even considered it as an option. And so something that's very important for me now is I've been speaking at high schools or speaking at colleges and just showing them, you don't have to follow my path, but I want you to show that this path exists.
Right. Yeah. I mean, entrepreneurism and, working in corporate America, they both have their challenges and they both have their opportunities. They're just different, right? They're different methods. So let's move on for a second. Let's talk about the book, right? Crush Your Money Goals, right? Here it is. It's right over your shoulders for those who are watching as well. Why did you write the book? What was the impetus behind that?
I had zero desire to be an author. I actually was very against it to the beginning. And I say that to everyone who's listening on this, is that sometimes opportunities arise that you are not only maybe not even thinking, but you're like, I would never do that. And I was particularly against it because I had a lot of clients who had written books before, but they're like not, anyone who's in the book industry knows, like, unless you're like Mel Robbins or Tony Robbins or something like that, you're not going to make money on the books. And what I decided to do is, long story short, at FinCon, I spoke on the main stage in 2022, and a traditional publisher in New York City reached out and said, hey, we would want you to write a book about money habits. And I thought it was fake. And I ignored the email. And then I told my friend, I'm like, I don't know, there's this company that's reaching out to me. I think it's fake. And they're like, no, that's a real company. It's a big one. You should answer that email. And so I entered the email and we negotiated to say, let's write a book about money habits, but I already have a lot of content from coaching hundreds of people at this point. And I said to them, rather than it just be purely from my perspective, I want to make sure we include stories from all these diverse people that I have coached over the years. And I want this book to be the book that I wish I had 10 years ago when I was looking for simple, practical things to do, and not just another book about how you put $50 and you somehow become a millionaire because of compound interest. Like, that's all out there already. And so they were very open to that. And luckily for me, because I already had a lot of the content, and I was also practicing my journalism with Forbes and CNET and CNBC, we were able to pull some of that stuff that was already tested also with audiences. And that's one of my biggest tips for people if you're ever interested in writing a book, is go out and write articles in other outlets so that you can get real-time feedback on whether or not the content is actually any good before you spend thousands of dollars putting it into something you cannot change afterwards. And the funny thing is, at the time that I was ready to sign the book deal, I was really hesitant on doing it. But my husband said to me, and I have to credit AJ on this, he said, I know like this is going to be a lot of work. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be so much work and you don't make money off of it or whatever. He's like, but how many people do you think this would help? And I was like, you're right. You're right. So we signed that book contract in October, and by April, like the whole book was written, which is a very short time period for books, but it was probably the best blessing I've had in this business so far, because it feels like the kind of closing chapter on this Crush Your Money Goals era of my life, where now anyone who wants to learn about Crush Your Money Goals and the way that I teach it, before I would, you would have to join one of my programs or spend a good chunk of money to be able to do that. But now anyone has access to it for $18.
Wow. And if I remember correctly, your book was a recommended read by Oprah Winfrey, right? So it got a lot of, activity because of that as well. How did that come to be? How did it end up on her reading list?
Pure luck. I have no idea. I have no idea.
I doubt it was that, but
I actually genuinely don't know how that happened. And that on January 1st of this year, my husband and I were sitting at an all-you-can-eat sushi restaurant, and I get a notification on my phone. I get Google alerts anytime my name is out in the news, and it says, recommended by Oprah Daily, which is Oprah's main platform. And I was like, what is this? And I click on it, and I'm in the restaurant, and this is family friendly. I say, oh, snap, snap. And my husband has a mouthful of sushi. He's like, what's wrong? And I was just like, I think Oprah recommended my book for 2025. And it's listed as one of the top 10 reads for 2025 for personal growth, which was very interesting to me because that's not a category that we were in. Like, we're in personal finance, and they kind of put my book in the realm of like Mel Robbins and Gretchen Rubin, people who talk about like happiness and like mental health and all of that stuff. And I could not be more grateful about that because, one, I told my husband, like, wait, is my book good? I didn't know it was good. And two, it made me realize something that I really underestimated, which was I've never been about PR. A lot of people think that I love doing media and press and stuff. I actually really don't. I'm a very strong introvert, and most people who know me really well, I'm just in my home by myself, like watching K-dramas. So but I realized just by it being recognized by the Oprah team, it really gave people the confidence that they would not be wasting their time. And that's what I realized, was that $18 is not a lot of money to spend to get like good, helpful financial education, but sitting a book and reading it for 8 hours is. Yeah. So I'm really grateful that recommendation came out so that people can feel confident that this is a good use of their time, not just their money.
Yeah. That's an amazing result and great opportunity. And I'm glad you knew who Oprah Winfrey was and didn't think it was like a scam email or something like that, because that would have been bad. But
is it bad that I think everything is a scam? Like, every time I open my email, I'm like, is this a scam? And so you're right. I probably
the world has created that, unfortunately. One of the things that I truly love about what you're doing is you've been working tirelessly to get the word out about the wealth gap being even greater for women than the pay gap, which sometimes there's a little, I think they're spoken about in the same sentences, and they're very different things. The wealth and the pay gap, two very separate things. How do you think, as somebody who's in this every day, how do you think we can move forward and help change the numbers on these trends, right? Because they're trending, the gaps are getting larger from what we're seeing. They're not getting smaller. How do we as a population start making some headway on that?
Well, this is why I love partnering with folks like you who want to even have this conversation, right? Because right now there's a lot of conversation of like, oh, like we're a merit type of, place. And it's like, well, if that's true, then women should not have a third of what men have when it comes to retirement savings. And that's the reality of what we're seeing, is that women own a third of what men own when it comes to overall assets. And but do we need a third of what men have? No. And actually, women live longer and might have more health complications down the line. And so, first of all, I just got super upset when I first saw that thing, because I just think about myself. I'm like, I said to my husband, like, this is not fair. Like, if I was an average woman and you're an average guy, like, I would have a third of what you have. But like, it's not like you worked 3 times harder than me or, any of that. And so first, I think the first step is us having this conversation. The fact that you are even bringing this up to me versus me having to bring it up myself, like, makes me so happy that you recognize that. But I was actually on a local television show here a couple of weeks ago, where this woman who was working at the studio was watching me do this segment. And afterwards, she came to me and she said, oh my gosh, I must work with you. Like, I don't know if I can retire. And she's probably in her like late 50s. And she's like, I've just relegated this entirely to my husband and my financial advisor. I have no idea how much money I have. And I was just like, the fact that that's not an uncommon conversation that I'm having, that I have to like literally tell women, hey, you need to be involved in this conversation as well. Your financial advisor is in the passenger seat. You're supposed to be in the driver's seat, not the other way around. So, it's really helpful for me to have folks like you who are advocating for that type of financial advising relationship as well. Like the fact that she has a financial advisor who only talks to the husband, to me, is already an issue.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, and this isn't an excuse, but just an observation, right? We've seen situations where we've met with couples, and we try to include everybody, and at
Mm-hmm.
times, it doesn't always have to be the male and the female. One person typically has a lot of control in the situation, and another person doesn't. And we try to engage them, and sometimes that person just doesn't want to be engaged. And I
Mm-hmm.
I think instead of what used to happen, which was, okay, we'll just engage with the person who's talking to us and drive forward. I think we have to work harder as a community, as advisors, and people who want to do the right thing and bring them into the conversation, almost work that into the situation so that they feel comfortable having those conversations and being involved, no matter who they are,
That's
right?
exactly right. That's
End of the
exactly right.
story.
And
Yeah.
I think that's where we as financial professionals can really help close some of the gap on that, is just even getting the people in the room. Even if you don't, like I'm even just telling these women, like, you don't even have to say anything. Just go to the meeting and make it known that your opinion matters in the situation, right? And so that's part of the issue that I'm having. And I think the other part that I am having a very strong rhetoric around is, I cannot tell you how many female entrepreneurs I talk to specifically that are just like, I don't like selling and I don't like self-promoting. And I think I want people to not feel like I'm bothering them with sales and stuff. And I was at a podcast conference a couple of weeks ago, and the question I got from this woman, she said, how are you so good at self-promoting? Like, how do you do that? And I said to her, I said, honestly, I just got tired of being broke and overworked. That's why I self-promote, because it is much easier for me to spend time promoting my own work that I know that I have spent years, putting the effort in to make sure that it's quality, that if I'm not promoting it, I honestly feel like I'm doing a disservice to people, because I spent a lot of effort and energy to make sure that it was good. So the conversation I'm having with a lot of women in particular around the wealth gap is that if you think you're going to get to financial independence by standing in the shadows and not promoting your work and not asking for the promotion and not asking for the raise and all of that, like that, we can't blame the patriarchy for that. We can't say, oh, that's their fault. That's our responsibility, male, female, for us to advocate for ourselves.
Great points. I couldn't agree with you more. And thank you for sharing those great points. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. And we end each of our shows asking our guests the same final question, because we are all about joy on the Mitlin Money Mindset. And that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
Okay. My husband and I are going on a camping trip, the first one of our couple career
Okay.
ever. And so last night we slept in our tent. We practiced putting the tent up in our balcony
Okay.
in the middle of the city.
Baby steps.
Baby steps to test out what it would be like to be in a tent for a couple of days. And we figured out that our butts hurt and it was a little too cold. So now we know what to do for our next camping trip, which we're very excited about.
Ritz-Carlton?
We're heading to like the mountains in just outside of Asheville here in North Carolina. And New York City girl, so I am not a camping type of person. And so on my Instagram stories, I was sharing with people that we had pitched this tent in our apartment building. and everyone was just like, wait, you're going really camping? I thought you were going to go glamping. Because you don't seem like a camping type of person. And I'm actually really getting a lot of joy of trying something new.
Well, I hope you get a lot of joy from the event and actually experiencing it. I am not a camper either, but, listen, everybody, you got to try it and see if you like it. So give it a shot. And I hope that it's something you find true joy out of. So Bernadette, it's been a pleasure having you on, and we're going to have all your information in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about you, learn more about Crush Your Money Goals, learn more about the book, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so if you would like to read or listen to a copy of the book, you can head to crushyourmoneygoals.com, and we have all the options of where you can sell it, including buy it, including all of the regular retail shops that you would expect and Audible. We do ask if you would buy it from a local bookstore. That would really help our local small businesses. And then if you want to learn more about how to start your money habits today, I have a free guide, and it's at crushyourmoneygoals.com/free guide. And you can download that today to learn some of the other resources that I recommend to people who want to get their money habits in order.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bernadette, and I appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Wow, what an incredible conversation. Bernadette Joy, you just dropped some pure financial gold today. From crushing $300,000 in debt to building wealth with confidence, your journey is nothing short of inspiring. Your energy, wisdom, and no BS approach to money are exactly what people need to hear. Thank you for empowering our listeners to take charge of their finances and own their future. You are a true wealth building powerhouse, and we're so grateful to have had you on the show. Bernadette Joy and Crush Your Money Goals can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.